This is HR in Review, a podcast dedicated to HR thought leadership, actionable advice, and all the latest developments in human resource management.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the second episode of our new podcast, HR in Review. I'm Monica Sharma, the editor of HRreview, and if you haven't tuned in before, in this short segment we'll be looking back at some of the recent standout stories, and we'll be discussing the most relevant topics linked to HR. Each week will be based around a different theme, and this week's is learning and development. Here today, I'm joined by my guest, James Marsh, who many of you will know from hosting HRreview's Inside HR webinars. And in addition to this, James is also a CIPD accredited human resources manager at ethical food and natural product retailer Planet Organic, and has responsibility over learning and development within this business. Hi, James. Thank you so much for coming on today. How are you doing?
I'm really good. Thank you, Monica. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. I'm really looking forward to discussing our topic today and hearing your insights. So as I've already mentioned, discussing our topic today and hearing your insights. So as I've already mentioned, the central topic of this week is learning and development. And so now, as we've kind of passed the 1 year mark of lockdown restrictions with employees working all over the country, I think L&D is an area which is set to see a lot of changes as hybrid working comes into play. There's been so many questions raised about how this may look now, now that employees are no longer working in one place, how companies can identify skills gaps if employees are working from home, and essentially how they can keep upskilling staff, which will obviously lead to better talent retention in the long term. So there's a lot to unpack here, James, and I'm sure you'll have some really interesting things to say. So I wanted to talk about our first piece of news, which was research carried out by PricewaterhouseCoopers, which found that of 32,500 people work, which meant that they were missing out on vital career advancements or training opportunities. So to break that down just a bit further, around 13% of this number said that this was due to their race. A further 13% said that they were discriminated against on the basis of class. Women were also found to be twice as likely to report gender-based discrimination at work, which stood in the way of their training. And I guess another key element, which I think a lot of people overlook, is employees being given the chance to do further training based on the current level of qualifications that they have. So the study showed that almost half of people with postgraduate degrees said that their employer gives them, many opportunities to improve their digital skills. However, when people with school leaver qualifications were asked the same question, only just over a quarter reported having the same experience, which ultimately shows a lack of inclusion. So I think, James, obviously this really isn't an ideal situation for the workforce. Training and upskilling is seen as a route to improving career prospects, and to know that many marginalised groups are missing out is a really worrying thing.
Absolutely.
So, in your experience working within L&D, do you think that unconscious bias features a lot? And if so, do you think there's any specific ways that this can be overcome?
It's a huge question. I think bias is always a concern, not just for learning and development, but all aspects of the people function within an organization. I think before I answer, we should get in a little plug here, because we've got a fantastic webinar coming up next week with Inside HR, which is our partners at Thomas International. We're going to be looking at almost exactly this topic. So I'm really, really looking forward immensely to talking about that with them. But I think, so it exists within all of us, and I think every organization has a duty to encourage a healthy conversation within your business to find a way to mitigate it. At Planet Organic, we've just finished the diagnostic stage of a process we're going through, working with a specialist consultancy. I'll give them a little plug as well, because they're wonderful. They're called the EW Group, and we've been working with them. That's sort of a really all-encompassing project, looking at how we can improve the diversity and inclusion within our business, and unconscious bias training was a major recommendation within that. And it fits within our wider L&D strategy. We talk about a lot, particularly within our management and leadership development. We encourage our people to develop their decision making and to understand what contributes to the decisions they make. And from the article that you put together on HRreview, and there's a huge body of research generally, as well as consistent feedback within Planet Organic about the value employees place on learning and development at work. And so an awareness, an understanding of unconscious bias and how that might manifest can only help people learn and develop. So I think that's really important. The idea that marginalized groups are continuing to miss out on development opportunities in organizations in this country, for me, I find that still really disturbing. I know, so the stats you mentioned there were the sort of the three key areas were around race, around class, and around gender. Yeah. All of sort of those marginalized groups saying they had less access to development. If you park the morality of that for a second, I know that's not easy, but let's park the morality of that for a second. It simply doesn't make any sense that businesses aren't tapping into the potential of all of their workforce equally. Right. It's a huge missed opportunity economically before you even get into the sort of the social equity and the morality of that. So, and for me, I find it difficult to sort of. I think we're beyond debating that developing the broadest range of talent from the broadest range of backgrounds, experiences, perspectives produces the best results. I think everyone within learning and development, and anyone listening to this who works within a people function or works specifically within learning and development, accepts that to be true. We know that that's true. So yeah, I guess that's quite frustrating to sort of see that feedback. And also, just as a sort of an aside, for what it's worth, I know that there was the publication of a report from a commission set up by the government to examine racial and ethnic disparities in our society in general this week. And it sort of seemed to question the existence, particularly helpful either.
That's a point that I wanted to raise, actually. I think a lot of people were quite shocked when that report was released, and the fact that they kind of encouraged organizations to scrap unconscious bias training, because I am aware that that was something the civil service did at the end of last year. And now the fact that they're also just encouraging organizations all around the UK to, scrap unconscious bias. And actually, it was really interesting, the recommendation that they made. They said that training and skill support should be made available for all employees, regardless of their background, which is obviously true. But they said that approaching it in this way, in a more general sense, could help to benefit more disadvantaged groups. Like, did you have any thoughts on that? That's quite different.
Yeah.
Quite different.
Follow us on Twitter at HRreview or join us on LinkedIn and Facebook.
Unconscious bias can only be tackled in organizations where there's an acceptance that institutionalized discrimination and disadvantage exists. And it's existed for a long, long time. Now, what this commission, and I haven't read the full report, obviously only the sort of the excerpts only came out yesterday, but there was a pretty swift response in the media from pretty much everybody about it. So I won't claim to have read the report. I haven't yet, but from what from the media coverage, it just doesn't feel particularly helpful to challenge that idea that institutionalized, and this specific area was talking about racism, but the article that you referenced talks about all kinds of discrimination.
Right.
It doesn't seem to make much sense to question the existence of that. I think we know that it exists. I think we know it's still a problem. I think if I was part of one of those groups, I would be pretty angry. So I would be pretty angry. So whether you can have a separate debate about whether unconscious bias training, the formulation of that, how that works and whether that's effective. You can have a debate about that for sure. But the concept of scrapping it and sort of throwing up your hands and saying, well, there is no way of challenging this, therefore, we need to look at doing something totally different. I don't know about that. I know that in Planet Organic, we are committed to exploring unconscious bias and unconscious bias training. And that's something that came through a recommendation that through this diagnostic process that we went through from a consultancy that they still firmly believe that we should be paying real attention to unconscious bias and trying to develop a conversation where it's not a defensive one, it's not an accusatory one, it's not something that we should feel guilty about, it's something that we should just and look to mitigate and work with as much as we can.
Yeah. I do want to say that I think there was kind of a silver lining to this research, which showed that most employees really do have a desire to continue learning. And I think the pandemic has brought that out. I mean, 2/5 of employees said that their digital skills have been improved throughout the prolonged period of lockdown. And then almost 4 and 5, so 77% said that they were ready to learn new skills or completely retrain. So as we kind of touched upon, I guess, earlier, how do you think that L&D will change now as a result of the pandemic, especially with, new work models that may come about?
Well, I'm definitely in that 2/5. My digital skills have improved dramatically in the last year or so. I think first, before we talk about this, I guess the pandemic has been an enormous, dark, stormy cloud, right? It's caused huge disruption to all aspects of our society, to our economy, and we shouldn't minimize that. That's really important to acknowledge. However, I must, as a learning and development manager, there are some huge silver linings. One of the things organizations focus on a great deal is providing training on how to manage change, on resilience, on managing under pressure. The pandemic has, speaking for the managers that I work with at Planet Organic, it's brought out these skills in amazing ways in our managers. I've been blown away by their strength, their resilience, their adaptability, and there is no training or development program that could have recreated the scenario that we've been in over the last year. And I have to say, the staff at Planet Organic and the managers, the departmental managers, our duty managers, as we call them, and our store managers have just honestly amazed me with their skills and the way that they've applied themselves. Obviously, we're a food business, so we've been open the whole time, and in very, very challenging circumstances, with periods where restrictions were changing almost every day. And they have responded magnificently. And I think there's no training program I could have put in place that would have given them what they've got out of this year. It's also really unlocked a lot of creativity within our teams. I had a couple of meetings over the last couple of weeks with our buying team for our health and body care product range. They've used a platform we've brought in to deliver virtual learning sessions. They've been live streaming stuff into the stores, creating knowledge hubs, getting all the store teams to access content, including from their suppliers. They brought in suppliers to do training, often just by setting up a mobile phone on a tripod in a store and sort of live streaming it to all the other stores. It's been amazing. So yeah, and I know that there'll be lots of other teams in the business that are looking to follow suit. So they've really embraced technology. Retail is traditionally a relatively low-tech industry, but we have really made the most of what we're starting to make the most of what we've got, and it's been, forgive the pun, but it's been quite organic as well. It's not been something that's been led by me, sort of top down. It's been something so for example, the health and body care team, it was a junior buyer that came to me and went, James, we're thinking about doing this. What do you think? And I went, that's magnificent. How can I help? With it. And you really start to see this stuff coming from within the store teams, from within buying teams, from within finance teams and ops teams. They are starting to adapt a really creative mindset to their own learning and to the learning of their teams. And that has been incredibly inspiring to watch. And I think it's really moved learning and development on for us significantly in a way that, and it's also, it's been great because obviously it's the stuff that we talked about before the pandemic that I was struggling to get approval and budget for that suddenly came very, very quickly once we weren't allowed to do things in the way that we always used to. So no, I have to say, like I say, we must acknowledge that the pandemic's been incredibly difficult for a huge number of people. But as a learning and development manager, there's been some really nice aspects as well, some really encouraging.
See, I think that's really interesting because a lot of businesses have kind of been discussing resilience as a topic, and like you said, I think so many companies will not have been trained for this, and it's kind of unleashed this whole new technological revolution. It's unleashed this whole wave of creativity in terms of different kind of parts of business that weren't really offered senior buy-in before. I guess I wanted to touch on something that you raised, which is that you said a lot of your learning and development turned virtual. There was like live streaming. I was going to ask your opinion on how effective you think learning and development will be if employees aren't in the workplace or aren't in the office anymore. Do you think that it will change?
If you have any comments on the HR in Review podcast, would like to suggest a topic or speaker, or provide other feedback, you can contact us using the email podcast@hrreview.co.uk. We look forward to hearing from you.
Yes and no. And I know this is a big debate at the moment with lots of, I know the chairman of Goldman Sachs has been very vocal over the last few weeks about feeling like their collaboration and creativity, it will only work if they're all in the same space. I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that there are lots of ways to collaborate and get creative. I do think that within that, once we return to a new norm, or a normal at least that doesn't include restrictions for a pandemic, I think that there will still be an important space for physical collaboration, people being in a room together and bouncing off each other, and I don't think that we should disregard that. I think there's a dimension to that is very difficult to recreate. That said, it's only one tool and on your belt, and there are a huge amount of others that we saw on them, but they should remain in the toolbox as well. The live streams, the webinars, the virtual collaboration tools that there are out there. I think there is some amazing stuff going on, and like I say, even in retail, which is obviously my industry, which is traditionally relatively low tech and not necessarily an early adopter of this kind of thing. It's been amazing to watch our teams really embrace it, adapt, and develop in this way. And so, I anticipate a mix of the two coming back, and that's what we're talking about in our team at Planet. I was quite a traditional sort of almost trainer before this. I was delivering classroom-based training, and I don't see myself doing a huge amount of that going forward.
So I just wanted to kind of continue on that topic.
I don't see myself doing a huge amount of that going forward.
Just wanted to kind of continue on that topic, I suppose, of staff being really eager to continue their training and learning. And I think one group that has been massively impacted in terms of their career development are young people. So for the second story, I kind of wanted to cast our minds back a bit to the beginning of March, where Chancellor Rishi Sunak announced his budget and a few new measures to help young people during this time. So one element that was announced was flexi job apprenticeships, which the government invested £126 million into. And this will essentially allow workers to work for a number of different employers in a single sector, so give them a vast array of experience. And then on top of this, Chancellor Sunak also announced an increase in the amount of incentives offered to companies to be apprentice. And obviously this is a slight change to existing policy, which gave employers £2,000 for hiring an apprentice aged 16 to 24 and £1,500 for hiring an apprentice that are aged 25 or over. So on this note, James, I wanted to bring you in and ask whether you thought that these measures went far enough to help young people in their career prospects, their career development, and if not, what more do you think the government could have added?
I mean, that's a tough one because the proof is going to be in the take-up of these flexible programs. I'm definitely, if I could speak generally, I'm definitely encouraged that the government and the Chancellor are placing such an emphasis on providing employment opportunities in this way. So, but the incentives that you mentioned will impact different organisations in different ways, right? So for us at Planet, right? So for us at Planet, Planet Organic, they make quite a difference for us. We're quite a small organisation. That £3,000 incentive is useful. Is really useful for us with a turnover of a company our size. When you get sort of into the sort of stratospheric amounts that you're talking about with some of the larger multinational corporations, I wonder whether that change in incentive will really change their behaviour that much. It's tough. I think it needs larger organisations to get on board, not just with the sort of the general concept, the framework, and the levy and the incentives that come with apprenticeships, traineeships, and now the more flexible version that they've announced in the budget this time. Right. But they have to get on board with the spirit of it as well, and it needs to be used to provide real opportunities, right? Not just as a fund to supplement their training budget. And that's where the debate has been around: are people using this in the right way? And I think Planet Organic, we've made a really conscious decision. It sort of obviously fits with our sort of ethical brand. We've made a real conscious decision to try and interpret these incentives, these measures, and the whole system in the way that they're intended, to try and genuinely provide those opportunities. Now, can it be said that everyone's doing that? I don't think that's true. But where the proof will be in the pudding is the behaviour of all organisations in response to this, and the take up of these more flexible options. And so the honest answer is I don't know, which is not helpful, I guess. But no, it's very difficult to design a one size fits all system that encourages all organisations to behave in the way that you want. So it will be really interesting, which on paper sound great. The idea that you can go and spend a year or longer working for multiple organizations within the same sector, picking up different experiences, different, training programs and development opportunities, a real sort of, multiple inputs from multiple areas, and benefiting from the institutional knowledge of more than one organization. Yeah. That sounds on paper to be fabulous. But we'll see whether there's actually how it works.
That's a really interesting point that you raised there, James, which is that obviously it won't be the same for all organisations. And I think a big point of contention for some people is that they're saying that this should have been mainly focused on 16 to 24-year-olds who have seen kind of the largest drop when it comes to employee numbers on the payroll. I think they made up around 60% of people that were struck off the payroll during the pandemic. So I think it was the CIPD who said that shifting, for encouraging employers to hire young apprentices to now having a fixed cash incentive, no matter what the age of the apprentices, could ultimately maybe dissuade some employers from hiring someone younger or someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can. Yeah, I think you can get. I tend to be quite a political skeptic, so I wonder about the motivation behind the removal of some of those age related incentives, and I wonder whether that's because the government are worried about the potential rise in unemployment when the furlough scheme ends. And that's been extended. We're now extended until September, and I think we're all worried about what unemployment levels might be like when that finishes. So my instinct is to link the two, and my instinct is to link the two and say, well, actually that's down to the government's worry about unemployment. Even though I think the CIPD are right, they would like to see those opportunities focused on a demographic, a sort of an area of the population that has been the most, really badly affected by this, which are young people. So yeah, again, it will be interesting to see how that plays out. But no, I agree in sentiment with the CIPD. I think the concept of the apprenticeship levy was always about trying to provide pathways into employment for young people who otherwise might find it hard to find them. And that's how we are approaching our Retail Academy apprenticeship at Planet Organic. That's how a lot of companies are doing it. We're also benefiting from transfer of levy funds from an enormous international publishing and education company called Pearson. We really view it as a way to provide opportunities for young people to excel in areas that they might not have got access to. And so I agree with that general point. But I think, like I say, I think the government's move there maybe because of their sort of anxiety about what may be to come later on this year.
You kind of raised the point of the apprenticeship levy, which is something I wanted to delve a little bit deeper into. I think so many different professional bodies involved in, L&D have been arguing for the need to overhaul and restructure the apprenticeship levy to make it really useful. And I think one of the things that we discussed, James, prior to the webinar is how scathing the CIPD were in their assessment of the apprenticeship levy. So they stated that it had failed on every measure and will ultimately undermine investment in skills and economic recovery without significant reform. So I think quoted some really, again, quite damning statistics. They said that the total number of apprenticeship starts has fallen by over 100,000 in the last 3 years. Similarly, again, on the topic of young people, the number of apprenticeships going to 19 to 24-year-olds has dropped by almost half since 2016. And then despite the levy being introduced to boost employer investment in apprenticeships, this has actually dropped by £2.3 billion between 2017 and 2019. Obviously, this is quite like I said, a scathing criticism. Do you kind of agree with the CIPD's opinion here, James?
Why not subscribe to the premium version of HR in Review? You'll get ad-free content, early and extra episodes and more. Even better, although it's the premium edition, it's absolutely free. Sign up at hrreview.co.uk/podcast.
Well, I wasn't surprised by what they said or by the timing of it, obviously right before the budget. So it's obviously trying to sort of, kick the government into having a look at this pre-budget. But the severity of the language did surprise me slightly, I must admit. I mean, it was really incendiary. It was really scathing. Again, for a retailer like Planet Organic, the apprenticeship levies have made a real impact, a real positive impact. It's allowed us to work with training providers that have really raised the bar of the quality of our training. And I'm speaking as the person who was providing it before. It really has raised the bar, compared to what I could provide internally. It's allowed us to create a program that recruits talented young people from local communities. It's allowed us to partner with larger organizations through transfer of funds. So Pearson, I mentioned earlier. It's allowed us into sort of interacting with networks. I mean, it's obviously we're quite London based. And so we've been working very closely with the London Progression Collaboration. I'm now part of the Ambassador Network for London for apprenticeships as well, the London Apprenticeship Ambassador Network. So obviously I clearly believe that there's a huge power and potential in apprenticeships and what they can have. But yeah, it's that same issue of that sort of no one size fits all. There's definitely evidence that the CIPD is right, and that organizations haven't used the levy in the way that it was intended. The levy isn't doing enough, I don't think, to provide those real opportunities to those who might have struggled to access them, and that definitely needs urgently addressing. I also they made a really interesting point within that about the apprenticeship standards themselves, and how a lot of we have a vast number now. There's huge numbers. A lot of them aren't accredited by industry bodies or professional bodies. If you get industry bodies or professional bodies, if you're going to do an apprenticeship, the qualification you get at the end of it should carry real meaning, real weight, and they should be sort of linked to industry standards as well. And we've in the last couple of years, particularly, we've produced a vast number of new standards, and I'm not necessarily sure that all of them provide real quality development opportunities in a consistent way. And, they've got to be aligned to the targets, the industry growth targets, in which that organization operates. And there also has to be an understanding for all businesses. And again, I can only speak for Planet Organic where I work, but we have an understanding that it is part of our duty to invest in the development of our nation's workforce, on the understanding that sort of the concept of sort of a rising tide lifting all boats. We all, if you're an organization, large or small, in this country, I think you have to recognize that duty to invest in entire industry that you work in and the entire economy that we exist in. So yeah, I do agree with the CIPD, absolutely. Even though, I the language of that statement really did take me by surprise a little bit. But that's not to say that the apprenticeship levy isn't doing amazing things. And there are, for my organization, it's been very, very positive for us.
So James, I know you mentioned a bit about we were mentioning reforming the apprenticeship levy. I think that something that's been brought up quite a lot is making it flexible, and a lot of employers have said that this could be really useful because then it means they could invest in courses that are not solely apprenticeships but also benefits, I guess, both ends of the spectrum, young workers in terms of like offering them technical courses, but also by reforming the scheme, it could help workers over the age of 25 who can access forms of other, accredited training and skills. So do you think that in reforming the system that this could be taking away kind of, I guess, key promotion and expenditure from apprenticeships, which have always been advertised as...
Again, it's such a tough question. I do believe that apprenticeships in their best form are more than worthy alternatives to university, for sure. And actually, it makes me think back to, I think one of the first Inside HR webinars we did it was definitely the first one we did specifically on apprenticeships, was in the summer of 2015. And we had a training provider, BPP, as our partner. We had the case study was JP Morgan. And I ended up interviewing a young woman, I think she was about 20, 21, and she had opted for an apprenticeship at JP Morgan over going to university, which at the time I think was quite a controversial decision. She said her parents are very supportive, but a lot of her friends went on to university and some of them were quite surprised at why she didn't. So it was quite a controversial decision for her to make, and she was just the most wonderful apprenticeships can achieve and what they can be. And she said that she felt better equipped to progress having gone through their sort of apprenticeship intake program than a lot of JP Morgan's graduate intake, who were often then slower to adapt to JP Morgan's way of working. And it was a really, really positive message about the power of apprenticeships. And I think in their best form, they are still a wonderful alternative to university degrees, and really provide really sort of industry specific skills, on the job skills training. And they can be really, really powerful, but they have to be done in the right way. And again, if you make the levy more flexible, do you drain resources from that? I don't know. It's possible. It's possible. But again, like with all these things, that's not to say that, yes, apprenticeships work in a certain way and like that. It's possible. It's possible. But again, like with all these things, that's not to say that, yes, apprenticeships work in a certain way and like that. And they definitely worked for that young person. But there are lots of other ways you can do it as well. I think it has to be about a general message about organizations, industry being a lot more invested, a lot more engaged with education and with young people. And if there are multiple pathways into doing that, not just apprenticeships, but obviously now we've got traineeships, we've got flexible apprenticeships, we've got other things. I'm not necessarily against that. I think that's great. But obviously, like with all systems, it has to work, and it has to work in the right way, and it has to incentivize businesses to do the right things. And again, is the levy in its current form universally doing that? Yeah. The answer to that is a certain no. Absolutely not. And it needs to improve, and it needs to improve urgently. But it can. Organizations approach it the right way, it really can do. So I'd be open to seeing the levy become more flexible, but I'd obviously the devil
I think it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. And I imagine, even if the levy was kind of changed or reformed before the pandemic, now we're entering a completely new working world, and I think it will be a bit of trial and error for organizations to figure out what works and I guess how to incentivize that.
Yeah, and it's been really hard. It's been really hard for organizations to bring in apprentices during the pandemic, for sure. So I know that some of those numbers were from 2017 to 2019, so they weren't including the pandemic. But I know that there will have been an inevitable drop off during the last year. So yeah, there may be now there's a window. There's an opportunity here to sort of assess the new normal and see how the levy can best suit that. So yeah, we should all sort of watch on, and with eager anticipation see what they come up with.
On that helpful note and kind of positive note, I think that wraps up our topic of L&D quite nicely. I think it's kind of fair to say, and I'm sure you'll agree, James, that HR teams will really have their work cut out for them when it comes to designing new L&D strategies which are fit for purpose in our new world. But I think, as we said, through trial and error, but also engaging with employees and, assessing how they feel about them, companies will eventually find the most effective ways of delivering training. I just want to say a massive thank you, James, for joining me on the show today. It was such a pleasure. It was such a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure. No, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's nice to be the person. Well, I guess it's slightly strange not being the interviewer.
No, I think all the points that you raised today, I think, will be really useful for our audience to consider moving forward. And I think, it's a really great discussion. If you do want to hear more from James also, as we did mention earlier, he does host our webinars run by HRreview called Inside HR. We do have one coming up this Thursday, the 8th of April, which is about rethinking workplace diversity and harnessing an effective D&I strategy when it comes to recruitment. But we also have one on the 22nd of April, which covers the benefits of fluid workforce management. Otherwise, if you're interested in learning anything more about, learning and development, apprenticeships, or any other topics linked to HR, please head over to our website, HRreview.co.uk. Thanks so much for listening to our podcast, HR in Review, and we hope to see you in 2 weeks' time, where we'll be continuing the discussion on the most relevant HR topics. See you then.
The HR in Review podcast is brought to you by HRreview.co.uk. HRreview.co.uk is a website dedicated to human resources and related professionals. News items are posted daily, together with analysis looking in depth at topical HR issues. You can sign up for our range of specialist newsletters at hrreview.co.uk/sign-up and follow us on Twitter at HRreview, or join us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Thank you for listening.